Welcome back, builders. In today's video we're going to attempt to update the Phantom 85 using this budget action camera as our primary source for video and audio. This is the Surfola SF430, coming in at $90 on Amazon at the time of recording. I'll be blunt, this was one heck of a challenge, as this is the cheapest camera I've used on the channel since its birth. Luckily, I wasn't quite ready for a full update video on the Phantom 85 and the Zeda Dawn, so you're not really going to be missing much as far as quality. Look forward to that video in about 2 weeks. Throughout the video, it'll probably be pretty obvious to most of you what my opinions about this camera are going to be, so let's go ahead and jump straight into the rebuild. We're going to start with a bench camera, 4K, 30 frames per second, using the external microphone included with the camera. And here we're going to be putting the balanced DLH Performance crank in the Phantom 85 that comes with the needle bearing. Alright, so we're going to test out this little action camera to see if it's good for a bench cam. I'm using the external microphone, and I'm in a room. It's pretty quiet. The acoustics is not great, so you might hear a little reverberation off the walls, which is why I normally do voiceovers with a high quality microphone. But for you guys, this might give a good test to see how it would work if you want to use it for something like this. I've got the AC turned off right now, but if it gets too hot in here, I'm going to turn it back on and audio quality might take a dive. But for now, we're going to go ahead and just try and brute force our way into dissecting this motor so I don't have to do that. This is the Phantom 85. It's the Gen 2 with the upgraded brass bushing. Does not have a needle bearing. So we're going to take it apart, replace the crank with a balance and trude crank from DLH Performance that's ready to accept a needle bearing. Look how many washers I have to use on these studs so that the acorn nuts don't bottom out. It's ridiculous. I made those studs way too long. Or you could just use open-ended bolts. When I take these jugs off motors, I always like to make sure they're laying on their side or upside down, because the studs, the threads, they like to shave off bits of aluminum and gasket, and that likes to drop into your motor. Now, I wasn't having any problems with this motor when I was running it last. And as far as I can tell, I'll give it a better look with a flashlight here in a little bit. As far as I can tell, that seems to look okay. Alright, so I took a light and I took my finger around the edge of this cylinder, and it's not looking great. There's a lot of scuffing on the intake side, and there's some light gouging on the exhaust side. This is not looking too great. Not really sure what to say. Maybe it got too hot. Lubrication shouldn't have been an issue. I run 32:1 on this, and I've been running it pretty rich. Not looking so hot. This motor maybe had 300 miles on it. Alright, sorry guys, couldn't do it anymore. Had to put the AC on. Louisiana, it's just how it is. So that ain't coming off. I purchased this entire impact driver for one specific reason, and so far have only used it for this one thing. And that is simply to remove this screw from these motors. So, how is the video quality? How's the audio quality? Using an impact driver on this kind of sucks too, but sometimes it's the only way to get these off. You're putting a lot of impacting force on the crank. And remember, even if you support the other side, which I unfortunately did with my wall, forgot I took the cover off, the impacting force is not going straight through a shaft from this side to the other. It's actually going into the crank and being transferred from the pin, which is somewhere on the edge of the crank, and that can cause it to bend, get out of true. Not a big deal on these cheap motors, But I mean, if you really got a whale on these to break them loose, you're probably going to have some crank issues. There we go. The end of the shaft is mushroomed out. I've had this happen on 2 other motors and one of my Discord members too. The bearing comes out towards the end, and then for some reason the end of these shafts are mushroomed out. I think it's from when they put the crank together. The bearing's caught on it, so the bearing is probably going to have to come out of the case, get knocked back down towards the shaft, and then I'm going to have to dress up the end of the shaft. They were not kind to this case. There's nicks all over this mating surface. I'm surprised it was sealed out of the factory. But like I said, I didn't notice any problems with this motor when I was running it. So this motor never ran like it had an air leak. It actually ran pretty good, but holy crap, are these seals mangled, both of them. They just smeared in there. Not putting a lot of pressure on it, just trying to work it a little bit. She's moving. And there we go. Just like that. Came all the way off. So if you ever get one of these that's stuck on like real hard, check for a lip. You might not even feel much of one. It was a real small lip. I just took that grinding wheel around it. Came right off. Okay, originally I had planned on stuffing the case by filling in these empty transfer voids on the Phantom 85. They're just not used, where they meet up to the cylinder. They don't go anywhere. And see if that made any noticeable difference. And then I was also going to add a bit of JP Weld to the sidewall of the intake ports to help prevent ring snagging. But the thing is that this cylinder, after closer examination, doesn't really look like it's got much life left in it. So I don't want to waste my time on that modification. There's a good bit of scoring above the exhaust port and a lot of scuffing around the intake port. We're going to run it until it doesn't run anymore and just see what happens. I do have an extra jug from the original that blew, and believe it or not, the lining on that cylinder is great. It looks fantastic. So if this one goes, I'll try the modification on the intake port with the old cylinder, and I'll fill in these transfers. Just don't want to spend that time on this one right now because I don't think it's going to last very long. So I went ahead and replaced the crank bearings just in case. One side felt great. The other side had a little bit of chunkiness. You might be able to hear it. Just spinning it up to the mic there. Nothing crazy. I could probably still use them as clutch bearings. They'll be fine. But for the crank, I like them to be as smooth as possible. Now, I pulled the seal out on the other side. I'm going to remove this seal before I button these back up. I don't want anything to fall in here right now, so I'm just going to leave it on until I'm ready. Now, here is the crank that came with the Gen 2 Phantom 85. And there's the bushing. Now, I looked at the bushing, and it actually still looks fine. But then again, we only had a few hundred miles on this. And this is the DLH crank. It's balanced. Looks pretty clean to me. Nice and centered. And here it's been opened up for the bigger needle bearing. Gasket all set up there. We got our gasket sealant on the other side. I'm going to go ahead and start tightening this down evenly to help push these into the bearings a little bit further, and then we're going to check the crank to make sure there's no resistance. If there is, there's another trick I'll show you guys here in a minute that can sometimes help with crank bearing binding and the clutch bearing binding. Alright, so as we were tightening these bolts and doing it in a cross pattern to try and get these to clamp together evenly, as suspected, there's a little bit of resistance on the crank. It's not that bad, but we want to try and get rid of it if we can. I suspect it's pretty close, but what I'm going to try first, I'm going to start from this side here, and I'm just going to give this shaft a few taps with this rubber mallet. We'll start with the rubber mallet before we get any more aggressive, and check the shaft to see if it made any difference. Nope, not really. We'll give it a few more just in case. Nope, about the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the magnet side, put on our bolt, try and get it flush with the shaft, and we're going to give this a few solid taps. We'll just give it one to start with and see what happens. Give it another. We don't want to bend this. Don't go hitting it too hard. That's a thin shaft. Ooh, yep, that freed it up. There we go. And I don't know how well centered the magnets are going to be on these Phantom 85s. This is the stock Phantom magnet. But one thing that is nice to see for once is that the shaft on the magnet side is true. I'm also curious because it looks like he shaved down and removed burrs from the bevel gear side. So we'll see when we put the bevel gear back on if it fully engages the large bevel gear, the clutch basket. You know, on a lot of motors they like to stick way out. Definitely nice to see. An even gap on both sides. Turn it over. Still an even gap. Alright, she's just about ready for the top end, but check this out. We got the basket and bevel gear back on. The bevel gear sticks out just a tiny bit, which is completely normal, but the back side of the gear also sticks out on the back side. See, the smaller bevel gear is a little bit bigger than the basket, so there's no wasted contact area there. And don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but the bevel gear spins true without any wobble, at least none that I can see. Alright, we got our jug on, and I was concerned that compression might be an issue, but even with the defects in the cylinder, she's got really good compression. Yeah, that'll do. Go ahead and talk about it. So we'll have a proper update of the Phantom 85 and first impressions of the Zeda Dawn soon on the channel, but let's talk about our thoughts and opinions about the SF430 from Surfola. What I'm about to say should come as no surprise to my regular viewers, or anyone who's literally seen any video on my channel. Although I am greatly appreciative for them sending me this camera for testing, I have to be honest, you didn't give me much to work with. First, the camera is advertised as 4K at 60 frames per second. It does record at 60 frames per second, so that's good. Unfortunately, it is definitely not 4K. This is a scaled up version of a lower resolution, which I suspect is just 1080p across the board. The image stabilization is pretty much useless for me. Even when riding as smooth as I possibly can without pedaling, the camera bobs all over the place. It's almost as if the image stabilization does not exist, but it does crop in on the footage, so it's doing something, I just don't know what. When using it on a tripod as a bench camera, it did a decent job and fulfilled its purpose. However, when outdoors in moving scenery, the color profile was really not good. I tried using manual white balance settings and the footage would either be way too blue or way too yellow. I could never find a balance. I ended up using it in auto almost all the time for the best results, and those were not very good. Audio from the camera's internal microphone was surprisingly decent and very usable. I found when using it on a chest mount, it was good, and there wasn't really any wind noise. Alright, so let's see how bad the wind noise gets. Audio from the external microphone was unstable and unpredictable. Sometimes it would record decent audio, but other times it would become clipped and distorted. Got that ignition timing retarded, and she cruises pretty nice. Unfortunately, due to the poor video quality, lack of decent stabilization, and unpredictable audio, I had to cut a lot of useful information out of this video. And that was when I was just using it as a bench cam. When I tried to actually use it for riding footage, it just turned into this. Normally with budget equipment, I would say they're good for some people, and in certain situations a cheap camera might be decent for somebody who just wants to record the ride and is not too interested in how the quality turns out. But in this situation, I think when you're at the price point of $90, it's worth it to save up a few more bucks. When all is said and done, video and audio quality is what's most important to me, so that's what I covered first. But that's not all lost, because there are some good things going for this camera that might pique your interest. Although it's not waterproof without the case, the physical build quality of the camera feels pretty good. It is lightweight in plastic, but it doesn't feel like it's cheap in plastic. Like most budget action cameras, it comes with a large assortment of mounting accessories for pretty much any practical situation, and it does come with 2 batteries, which I found to record over an hour of footage each, but that's going to be because it's 1080p and not 4K. Unfortunately, there's no external charging dock for the batteries, so you have to charge them in the camera, and that kind of defeats the purpose. There is, however, one situation where I think this camera does shine, and it's how I'll be using it throughout the future, and that's as a dedicated dash cam. Most dash cams you buy only have a battery that lasts a few minutes just to save the footage in an emergency situation or as the vehicle is shutting down. However, the built-in battery on this will record for almost a full hour, which is decent if you need to take it out of the mount and use it for external shots outside the vehicle, whether for something important or just to capture some cool shot you see on the side of the road. And because the internal microphone actually records decent audio, it just makes this much more versatile as a dash cam than anything that's dedicated. The software is stable and it never froze up once during my testing. And the touchscreen is sensitive and responsive. It's pretty simple too, so it's user-friendly in my opinion. So that's going to wrap it up for my review of the SF430. It's not a camera for me, but it does have its place. I hope you guys got some useful information out of today's video, or at the very least were mildly entertained. And until next time, ride safe.